to another episode of Lightwork Presents Everything is Connected, where we share inspiring stories on a wide range of cultural and social issues worldwide. On this two-part episode, we're joined by Ferrari Sheppard, the Chicago-born, Los Angeles-based contemporary painter whose first solo show at Wilding Cran Gallery opens on September 12th in LA. In conversation for almost 2 hours, this episode will be dropped in two parts, one this week and one next week before the opening of Ferrari's show. The artist spent time living in Africa over 3.5 years before returning to the US in recent years. On this episode, Ferrari shares some of his experiences living on the continent, how finding his unique style took time and dedication, and the healing that starts from within. Now, before we begin, please pardon any technical issues with the audio of this recording that took place remotely with Ferrari in Los Angeles and me in New York City during COVID. Let's go! Where does your style come from? How has it developed over time? And do you often or at all reference the foundation of your art education into how you approach your work?
I attended the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, which was an interesting experience and program. It was really heavily conceptual. I guess there's so much of my mind that doesn't work in that way in terms of conceptual art that, I was always thinking about ways to apply what I was learning to the world that I know. When I first started, like most painters, my goal was to make work that was as realistic as possible. So I was figurative realism was my thing, So I took a hiatus. It had to be 12-year hiatus from painting.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and I went and I made my name. So, I started a career in journalism. That's actually how I ended up linking up with Mos Def. He reached out to me and he said he was a fan of my work. So what started as kind of just like this fun project, it turned into an actual project, where, now we're on a Tonight Show performing and all of that. During this whole time, in these different worlds where I was like expressing myself, it all felt free to me and it all felt consistent in terms of modes of creation don't feel different to me. Like, whether I'm acting as a photographer at this moment or I'm acting as this or whatever, like it feels the same to me. But I started to miss, I felt that it was time for me. Maybe this was 4 years ago. I felt that it was time for me to return back to my roots. As a visual artist, I had this great talent that I had been, not neglecting, but kind of I took a detour from, which was visual art. I said I need to get back to it. I see myself for the next 20 years, 30 years, in my studio, with my studio practice, doing a few shows a year. So that's how I returned back to visual arts. And in terms of my style, that was one of the biggest challenges of my life. I'll always say that. Some artists, they have it where they have this style. It's almost like their penmanship. I had so many modes of expression that I had to dig deep to find my unique style. Because what happens usually whether you're trained formally or not, you fast learn that a lot of things have been done already, right? So you as the artist have the challenge of coming up with something that is unique, with withstanding all of the greats that have come before you. You have to create something that's unique.
Absolutely.
So what I did was I put two of my modes of expression together. I meshed them together into a hybrid. I started as a figurative realist artist, heavily centered on the figure. And then I merged before I went on my hiatus. I went left and I became a strictly abstract painter. So my love for both modes of these expressions, I always wanted to kind of like mesh them into two and have them be harmonious. I say it was difficult to find that because, I was trying to be a professional artist, and, I'm showing my work to some of the right people and some of the wrong people, but mostly some of the right people. They would tell me, this is really interesting and everything, but it wasn't the reaction that I was looking for. So I knew I had to go deeper. I had to go deeper, and I found my voice. It was no question about it, because all the doors just flung open, and I am where I am now, which is I'm an emerging artist, but there's definitely some things being said about me in good places.
For my next question, where do you think some of your influences come from as far as people or artists that you're inspired by, whether living or deceased?
Well, one thing, like I have a shrine that I have up, on it's an altar with a shrine. It's not anything creepy or anything. It's just, people who I call them my ancestors, and they inspire me. Some of the people who are up there that I'm looking at, you got Patrice Lumumba, Tupac, you have Jean-Michel Basquiat, you have Jacob Lawrence, Frida Kahlo, and my grandmother, so Fela Kuti. So what I noticed, the common thread, you have Nipsey up here. They were fearless in a certain way. And it takes a lot of courage to put yourself on a public stage. It seems that, with Instagram culture and social media, now everybody wants to be seen and everybody wants to be really loud and everything. But I don't necessarily think they understand what it means to be on a public platform as a thinker. Let's just compare it to somebody like, Audre Lorde, or someone who has their practice and they set it out to be criticized, by the masses. So that's one thing that, I think that is a common thread with the people that I admire, the artists that I admire, is that they were not afraid to be different, and that they stood by it, that they stood by who they were, and they knew exactly who they were when they looked in the mirror. I don't think you can do something on a high level, in terms of like your artistry, if you don't have a good sense of who you are. And it's a struggle to get there. Like, we all go through stages in our life where we are looking at the greater world, we're comparing it to ourselves, we're trying to find out who we are, where we exist in that world. And I don't think that ever stops, but you do come to a point where one can have an understanding of who one is, what a person is. I think that's when you start getting the best art out of an artist.
You're pulling me in so many different directions. With what you just talked about, I read about you that you've spent a lot of time living in Africa and traveling throughout different parts of the continent. How would you say that experience has added to and perhaps solidified the foundation that you have of where you come from and your own identity?
Well, I lived in South Africa. I've lived in Tanzania, Ethiopia, and I visited several other countries throughout the continent. And one thing that I found, I was actually invited to the African Union in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, I believe in 2014, or maybe it was 13. And they were, for the first time ever, the African Union was opening up conversation to talk about art, because most of the conversations that happen in the African Union are mainly about political and infrastructural needs.
Yes.
Throughout the continent. I had these ideas based on Pan-Africanism, and reading Garvey. I was a Garveyite, I quickly learned that, if Marcus Garvey had been permitted to ever visit the continent, he would have soon adjusted his plan and his modes, because it's not as easy as, let's just move back to Africa. There is I soon learned how vastly different every country is and how big and vast Africa is. So whether you're in you're in a city where there's great modernity or Western influence, or you're in, a village, a remote village, like that's the gradient and the range of the experience, So everybody's not gonna get along. Like we don't know much about each other. Like I think that Garvey would have wanted to implement a form of education on both sides of the Atlantic and throughout the diaspora and also in the continent. Like my mother is Ethiopian, and they said, well, are you eating out there? I was getting like questions like that from the States. They say, are you okay? Are you eating? And I'm like, yeah, I mean, I just ate. But in their mind, they're thinking about these images, of like starving children with flies around their head, and they would have no idea that, in terms of Ethiopia, that was a small region in the north in the early 90s that had a famine, and the rest of the country was fine. So it's almost like it's really unfair, because imagine if a mass shooting, let's just say in America, or whatever bad negative thing that happens in America becomes to define it as what it is. So that part, I feel like there needs to be education on that end, and then there also needs to be education about the Africans that were kidnapped. And because there are people, I've come across a lot of people on the continent, and they may have not had access to first of all, I just want to say that although they may not, the Africans I've come across, they may not have had access to the education around this transatlantic slave trade and what happened after that and Jim Crow, they are forced to see at least Black Americans on TV all the time. So it's one of these things where we're highly, like in terms of Black Americans are highly influential throughout the world, not just in the continent, but it's not always by choice. And that is a result of like Western domination. The fact that you don't see what's going on every day in, let's just say, Ivory Coast. We don't see that. Imagine America when you turn on TV and all the shows are from, Nigerian shows. And the only thing is about Nigerian music, and that's a form of oppression in itself. So there's so many elements that come into play that what my time living on the continent taught me was that patience, first of all, to have patience and to not lump everything into the things they often are very complicated. One thing that was really off-putting but very educational to me was being, I was living in Zanzibar in Tanzania. I was learning Swahili, but I had to learn some form of Swahili because if you go to the market and you start talking, sounding like you're from Brooklyn, they think you're Obama's cousin. Like wherever I'm at in the world where there's Africans, I may be able to assimilate into that. When I'm in Tanzania, I'm just a Swahili dude walking down the street. Until I open my mouth. I had to learn the language, to an extent. But damn, did I just forget my point? I was talking about Zanzibar.
Yeah, because I think what you were saying is that you talked about patience being really important in terms of understanding the dynamic nature of being in Africa, and that I think we have a strange view of it from, the view of Africa from the West is warped. But sorry, go ahead.
Right, exactly. From the West is warped, but it's also a view of the U.S. and wherever Europe is warped there. But one thing damn, you had just touched on it.
I'm sorry.
Damn, look at me. Oh, okay. So this is what came a revelation that I had was so there would be these, because I couldn't speak the language as well, as I wanted to, like I didn't, in terms of getting Swahili friends, like they would be very cursory, you'd be like, hey, what's up, man? How you doing? How you feel? Did you eat? But you can't say I didn't know how to speak that well to say, how do you feel? So I ended up hanging with a lot of expats. And some of them were coming from the UK and wherever, but they were Black and some was whatever. But I started to see that I met more Black expats than I would have liked to, that had this issue of a colonial mentality. And what I mean by that is, although they're African, they're coming over and they don't view the local people who have welcomed them as human beings, And I was like, I never saw that in my life, where it's like this privilege, this Western privilege of, coming in and thinking that you should be served and And it was just very interesting to see that. And then I started to do some studies on where did this begin. I know everyone will say, well, it started with colonialism and slavery, but let's talk about specifically let's find out specifically where it began. And I would say that it began with Liberia. Most people don't know, but the group that were sent from the United States, they were slaves, former slaves. They were so-called quote-unquote African Americans, and they were sent to this place which was named Liberia after the word liberty, Liberia, and they colonized that country to such a degree that the families, the descendants of those African Americans that went there, still are in control of the country today. And I started to think about Pan-Africanism and all of the trauma that we have experienced through colonialism and slavery and displacement. And I started saying, man, a large part of what we would identify as the enemy is within us.
Wow.
Okay, we have to unlearn. It's like our responsibility. The enemy is also external. Don't get me wrong, but you go to some countries and there's always gonna be a African elite, and they, I say that they are the result of white supremacy, Arab supremacy. They just want someone to be on top of themselves. You get what I mean? But it also is operating under white supremacy because they're looking to stomp on someone, and it's usually someone who looks just like them, who are their countrymen.
Right.
So I think that, my travels and I wouldn't say travel, but living in a place, it taught me how much, first of all, patience and how much we need to heal. And it started with myself, seeing that, I'm coming from two worlds, but they're the same. When I'm in Ethiopia, like I'm an American, falling things, they'll ask me, they say, Mama Habesha, and I say, Habesha. They say, yeah. And then they'll feed you with their hands. But, at the same time, it's like we're different culturally.
Yeah.
I don't call myself an American because what the fuck is America? To me, Africans have always been second-class citizens in the United States. We've had to fight for our position here every step of the way. So we're other. Like there's something else. Like I would say, I always check when I'm at immigration or wherever they ask my nationality, and I always put second-class U.S. citizen. I don't identify as American because America is the thing that, when you enter a small town, you see all of these American flags or maybe some Confederate flags, and then you see some crosses. I know for myself as an African, I feel in danger. I feel like I'm behind enemy lines,
Yes, 100%. And that danger is very real.
And it's real, so how could I now call myself an American? I feel more African than anything. When I came back to America from living in Africa, I entered through Miami Airport in Miami, and I was detained by the Department of Homeland Security for hours. I'm talking maybe it's like 6 or 7 hours. I was so confused. I was so tired because I had just had a flight. I flew from Addis Ababa all the way here, and I'm like, what's the problem? I get interrogated. They wanted to know why I went to Somalia, and some people would say, well, I understand there's some terrorists in Somalia, but I would say, fuck that. Like there's mass shooters in America, but you don't see anybody grilling every white American that comes to a country and say, are you a mass shooter? Were you with a mass shooter? So, what they were really perplexed about was, why were you living in Africa?
How long were you there?
I was there for I would say 3.5 years.
Wow.
So, no, but the point was, and they were like, how are you supporting yourself? And then they asked me for my mother and my father's name. I wrote it down. And then they asked me this crazy question. They said, do you feel more African or do you feel more American?
That's insane.
And I said, I won't. I knew what type of trouble you could get. I was like, I won't dignify that with an answer. I feel African right now. That's what I actually told the agent that. I said, I feel very African right now.
Oh my God.
It's like, welcome back up against the wall. Get your hands up against the wall.
And spread them.
So, spread them, exactly. So, man, some of the challenges that I found, because I was looking to never come back to the state. That's where I want to be. I realized, financially, that wasn't anything that could be sustained. There's so much that goes into the immigration process. Anyone who's done it, I take my hat off, and, I don't think people really understand understand how much work it takes, especially in this modern times where you can't just get off the boat and kind of come in, and especially with somebody like Trump in office,
Of course. I want
Yeah.
to talk about something that you mentioned while we were on the phone. So before the podcast started, we started talking about like institutions and museums and people getting in touch with you. How do you feel about institutions like scrambling to show solidarity for Black Lives Matter and these like racist issues that we're going through right now?
So this is the thing. Black people, Africans, we have had patience. We have been beyond patient. We have been like benevolent. And, my maturity has gotten me to a place where I understand that anger is a great place to start. Rage is a great place to start. It's a catalyst, but down the line, it doesn't do any much more for you, unless you're ready to go to war, which in this case, I don't think that a traditional war is possible. Because right now, like as I explained before, the enemy is within also, so it's hard the only way to fight an idea or to kill an idea is with another idea that is strong, so, the fact that part of me feels extremely cynical, with this new awakening of, oh my God, you are oppressed. I didn't know, where I'm just like, bro, we've been literally bleeding in the street for the last 400 years, man. Like, you did not know. You're seeing these videos of like these people who we're calling Karens now, and, the Karen saying like, I'm going to call the police on you and they're going to come and murder you. I think that a lot of white people have a great understanding of the power that they hold and how much oppression there's been. I think that, I assume that there's a great fear amongst white people that, Black people and you just say Africans, and they've been slighted. And if it were white people who it was happening to, they know that they would have gotten retribution by now. So they expect retribution at all points. And that creates a culture of fear of, trying to prevent that from happening. But like one thing that I know most Africans know about each other, what we know about each other is that we don't want retribution. We don't want revenge. We just want to be left alone.
Right.
Left to our own devices, I think that there's nothing that we can't do. So, and I think that white people understand that as well. And that's part of the reason why there's been this great push to keep, it's like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Aside from that cynicism, like I am shocked. I'm shocked in a good way. I've never seen people this up in arms and like saying, okay, well, we want to change things. So I try to appreciate that, and I try to not let my anger and my rightful rage get in the way or create a permanent sense of cynicism, because, this may be an opportunity, right?
100%.
Yeah, so in saying that, it got to the point where I'm sure there's so many different artists out there who can relate. Because COVID hit, right around the same time as, this movement started, I was receiving mixed inquiries, which were like, will you donate a work for this cause or that cause? I found that to be interesting, and I did it a few times, and then I started to think about it, and I say, artists are treated so poorly, when you think about it, I would say on, in terms of essential work, people don't think of art as an essential thing, but it's literally what keeps us alive. Life would not be worth living if it wasn't for art. And I put a Mercedes-Benz into the conversation of art because it is art. Anything that is visual, auditory, or makes you think or elevate, poetry, whatever it may be, a commercial, makes life worth living. So when COVID happened, I found it interesting that the first people, other than the medical staff and essential workers, the first people that society leaned on was artists.
Yeah.
Via verses or, entertainment, music, but, also with the arts where it's like, we need to keep going. We're all in this together. And I told myself, I'm going to remember this sentiment, because if it changes down the line, I'm going to call it out for what it is.
Right.
Okay.
I love that.
I have, and I won't get into like all of the donations that I made via my art. I think that was the right thing to do. I need for that sentiment to continue on and carry on. Otherwise, I'm going to be permanently cynical. And so will young people that are watching everything that we're doing right now. They see through the bullshit. You have Black Lives Matter ice cream and gelato. You have Black Lives Matter sports drink. Like, what the fuck? Like, no, capitalism has never been the answer to the social problems that we face. Anybody who's listening to this, they should check this out. It's on Instagram. It's called Show Your Boardroom, I believe. It's on Instagram. And this person started this during the whole, like the uprising and Black Lives Matter, to show all of the top corporations, be it in America or multinational.
Yeah.
And show who's in the boardroom.
Right.
And when you see it, it's a sea of whiteness. You'll find a brown and black face every now and then, And what that tells me is that, it informs me that, yes, okay, well, socioeconomically, we've been like kept out of the boardroom or the seat at the table, as Solange would say.
Yes.
I have a different idea. There's a different perspective. What it tells me is that we need to start our own stuff.
I've always felt like that.
We need to start our own businesses. Yeah.
I feel you 100%.
Because, whatever you do, it's like living in your mother's house or your parents' house. You're under their roof, and you can't tell them what they should do under their roof. So you have to build your own thing. And I think that without getting in trouble, I don't think that it's wise to ever lay out your plans, all of your plans. But for me, I think that it's important for me to remain as independent as possible. I went through that awkward stage in my early 20s where I was trying to get corporate jobs, man. Imagine me in a corporate job. But yeah, I was trying to get a corporate job because, like obviously your parents are hounding you. They're like, well, what are you going to do with your life? And Jesus, you got to get something and blah, blah, blah. And I went out and I tried so hard to get a job. I tried so hard and I never could really lock one in. And I realized that they sensed something about. I realized later that they sensed something about me, and that thing that they sensed about me was that I'm a true entrepreneur. Yes. Companies want employees who are loyal, not the first. They already knew the first time something came up where I can make my own business, I would jump at it, which taught me a lot about myself, because I say, man, that's a powerful attribute to have. So for me, becoming an artist, there was no other alternative. It's literally do or die. I was like, I have to make this work because there's nothing else that I can do. I'm talented. I told myself this, I was in my mid 20s, early 20s. And I said, I have to make this work. I'm talented. All I have to do is figure out how I can monetize that, because one thing that I mentor some young artists. Nothing says something more than your pocketbook. I'll have an artist come to me and it'll be like, great, they'll make some great work or whatnot. And I'm like, okay, I want to buy this. How much does it cost? And they'll say, I don't know. Or they'll say they'll lowball themselves so bad. And I say, try again. So it may be 5 times what they were asking for, but I'm trying to teach them their value. Because until it wasn't until I got my first real money from making art that I understood, like, man, my stuff is like valuable. I can live off of this. I have dignity, because sometimes I think that people, they actually feel like buying art or supporting artists is a donation. They're saying, I support this person, like as if it's for breast cancer or something. No, you're getting something in exchange, something extremely valuable. Yes. I think that the day that artists collectively come together and start realizing their value, we won't be stopped.
Do you feel like you've seen the art world change since you sort of re-entered it a few years ago up until now? And with that change, how would you describe the rise in popularity of Black art and art by Black artists?
Oh man, there you go. Hold on, I have to sip a drink for this one.
Okay.
Okay. Yes, I have seen this change, what some are referring to as a Black Renaissance.
Yes.
So I have an issue with that, okay? Because seeing how I've studied art history, I would say the last 1,500 years of art history, I have an issue with this urgency that has now been imposed on collecting Black art. Like, it's right. Black art, it's the end thing. You have to have it. And have you heard of Ferrari Sheppard? And I'm Wakubofa and all of this. And there's this sense of urgency where it's like you better hurry up and get in because you know it's just a phase and it'll go away. I find that repulsive because, as I said before, we're talking about 500, 600, 700, 800 years of white dominance, of European dominance in art. You're telling me that a few black artists are finally getting some recognition, and this calls for a newsletter and chaos. I would like to say to those people, and I don't think that I will ever bite these words, get used to it, okay? We're not new. Black art is not new. It's the oldest because Africa is where everyone came from, okay? Not only that, but movements in African art there have been several of them, and they have never stopped. They've been overlooked, but they were always there, and we will remain here. So, that's just one thing, and I'm passionate about that because, Jean-Michel Basquiat once said, he said, I don't want to be considered a black artist. I want to be considered an artist. And I used to take offense to that because I say, man, you African, like you Puerto Rican, Haitian, where's your pride? But I think I was misreading or misunderstanding what he was trying to say because I wasn't in his position. He wasn't saying he wasn't proud to be an African. He was saying that artists like Picasso and Monet, they aren't referenced as white artists. They're impressionists, they're cubists. There's no such thing as a white artist. So when we get grouped together as like, here's the little special table with our black artists, it's a thing because that it questions our humanity. So you're telling me that African humanity is somehow relegated to this white gaze where it becomes, I would say, living on a continent and building with my continental African brothers, right? I would see that their art will be placed, if they didn't go west or if they didn't go to Europe, their art is placed in like a place of something like an artifact, or something that you buy. What is the thing where a souvenir? You understand? Okay. So, like, I was in Benin and I picked up this mask and it's like this fucking masterpiece work of art and they probably spent $10 on it. Okay. And then they sell it to London Museum. It's just like, it's horrible. So that's when you're on the continent, and when you're here, they say, well, here is our special black artist. You're now, it's like with me, like, I mean, I'm selling for a high price right now, but it's nothing compared to where, it could go. But, it's almost like I'm the exception. You understand? Right. And there cannot be too many of us in a room. You understand what I mean? Like, there can only be one. We're positioned in this place where we're always in this, like what they used to do to the slaves, in terms of making them fight each other for survival. So it's like there can only be one black person here. There can only be one black queer person in the room that's special.
And there can only be one black person, on the executive level of a company. That's the same idea.
Yeah.
And that person is usually a diversity and an inclusion hire, right? Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So, I don't have anything that I would like to share about where I feel that I can change that, but I do have a plan. I have a plan.
Okay.
And that's all I have to say about it because, I'm also learning a lot. Like, I'm young. I have a lot to learn, and I'm open to learning. But at the same time, like, I peep bullshit. I was given the gift to peep the bullshit really soon, and right now I think that there's something definitely exploitative going on with our art. I can feel it. I feel it. Do you really know the stories of these bodies that you're buying from me? Early in my career, in terms of not my whole career, I'm talking about as I became like this emerging artist, I had to sell to whoever. I didn't have to sell to them, but I needed to sustain myself. So I was selling to people who I knew had no clue what the fuck was going on or cared what was going on in my art. They just heard from another person they respect that this is the person who's going to blow up and going to make you a lot of money or give you a lot of social status. So as I've come along and, like once you make some money, and your needs are met, you no longer have to do things you don't want to do.
Yes.
Now I can pick and choose where my art goes, and I don't want to piss off anyone who's listening to this, some of my collectors, because they may feel like, oh, you're just hiding work from me. No, it's not that. I'm I'm big on stating that I'm not a machine. Like once, and this is how it went for me. Like it was first, I was like a struggling artist who no one would pay attention to at all, right? And I don't take that personally because I had to find my voice. I had to earn my position, right? But it goes from that to absolute insanity over the work. And there's this demand for the work as if I was a machine pumping out, $40,000, $30,000 paintings. And it's like, I try to remember that I must pace myself and that I'm not a machine, and that if it's worth having, it's worth waiting for. And in terms of like my practice right now, the thing that I feel that people are gravitating to, that they gravitated to in the first place visually, was a sense of purity and a sense of something that wasn't contrived and wasn't driven by capitalism. So I need to stay in that place, even though I know a lot like money is on the line right now. You have to wait. You just have to wait. I have to wait. Some nights, some days, I get up and I try to paint and nothing's coming. Nothing comes. And then sometimes I'm prolific as hell and I just pump out 4 paintings rapid fire. I can't call it. I would say that, to be a great artist, that means, anybody. I feel like any artist can get lucky and make a great work of art, once or twice. But to do it dozens and dozens of times, you have to know that there's a relationship between the artist and the universe. Some people may call it God. I call it the universe, wherein one must understand that I don't own this talent.
Right.
Okay.
This is
I don't own
a
the
gift.
talent. It's a gift and it comes. I have to be patient and I have to have faith at all times and say, you know what? It's going to come. It's going to come back. There are times where I have to look at older paintings that I did to tell myself, like, dude, you can paint. Because I forget, I'm like, can I really paint? Like, what the hell? Like, I'm struggling to that extent.
Right. And still being able to pump out a masterpiece. I mean, that's what's
Well, eventually it'll come. What I found is that once I let go, I go have a beer and I go to the countryside or wherever and go party with some crazy people. I come back to the studio, I relax, I turn on the Love Supreme album, and then boom, here it goes again. I'm right back on the horse.
Look at that. So you have your process. Like, you've discovered your process as an artist.
Definitely. And it's always expanding, but the core is always there. That it comes down to faith. It comes down to belief in myself.
Mm-hmm.
Being able to look in a mirror every morning and see every iota, every molecule of my soul still intact. That helps me lead. I haven't lost myself at all.
Well, there you have it, folks. It's a wrap. Catch us on our next episode, where we'll pick back up with Ferrari and dive deeper into meaningful conversation on art and culture. As always, stay motivated, stay inspired, and stay up. Peace and love, y'all. We out. Stay tuned for Ferrari's upcoming show at Wilding Cran Gallery, opening in Los Angeles on September 12th. Thank you again for listening, and we'll see you next time on Lightwork Presents Everything is Connected, conversations on culture and current events with some of today's most exciting creative contemporaries.